You've been lied to about success, about effort, about why some rise and others vanish in the fog of exhaustion. We were trained to believe in the myth of meritocracy, that hard work would save us, that sacrifice, discipline, and obedience would unlock the gates of freedom. But look around. The ones at the top are not the most exhausted. They're the most strategic, the most dangerous, the most disobedient to the rules everyone else follows blindly. This isn't laziness, it's illusion. The system rewards not effort, but vision. It teaches you to worship labor like a god while punishing those who dare to question the altar. The halo effect blinds you, tricking you into thinking that busyness equals value. But Nietzsche saw it coming. He warned us about the obedient man, the one who surrendered his will to power, working tirelessly inside a machine designed to keep him small. Because the elite, they don't hustle harder. They play a different game, one with invisible rules, one where power isn't earned, it's claimed. And school? It was never about your mind. It was about your submission. You were rewarded not for your ideas, but for your compliance, for echoing what you were told. Nietzsche called this the resonant man, the one who doesn't think, but repeats. A good student becomes a good employee, not a sovereign mind, not a creator, just another well-trained cog in a respectable cage. If you want to break this programming, start here. Ask yourself 3 forbidden questions every day. Is this my thought or someone else's? Does this belief serve me or silence me? What would I risk if I stopped pretending? Because you can be intelligent and still domesticated. You can be educated and still sleepwalking. And nowhere is this more obvious than in hustle culture. This religion of effort, this morality of the grind. In the 21st century, to suffer is seen as sacred. To be tired is a badge. To sacrifice joy, meaning, and sovereignty, all for a paycheck or a post, is seen as virtue. But Nietzsche knew that's slave morality. When powerlessness is reframed as nobility, when struggle becomes your identity. Psychology calls it cognitive dissonance. The more pain you endure, the more you want to believe it must mean something. But suffering doesn't prove your worth, only your conditioning. You don't need to work harder. You need to ask better questions. Not how much can I endure, but where is my leverage? Strategic creation over blind sacrifice. Subtle power over visible pain. But here's the trap. Most men don't see this. Because they mistake discipline for virtue. They confuse submission with strength. They wake up early, follow the rules, never complain, and still feel empty. Because discipline in the wrong direction isn't nobility. It's enslavement. Schopenhauer wrote that most of our desires aren't even ours. They're implanted, projected, marketed. And through operant conditioning, your mind learned to associate obedience with worth. To please the system became survival. You don't need more discipline. You need more rebellion against everything that numbs you. That's why we need the path of the Übermensch. Not the rebel full of rage, but the creator full of clarity. The one who doesn't fight the game, but walks off the board. Nietzsche called it the transvaluation of values. When you stop inheriting meanings and begin inventing them. And this begins with 3 rituals. First, observe. What games are you playing without consent? Second, question. Whose voice echoes in your mind when you make decisions? Third, redesign. What would your life look like if it obeyed your soul, not the algorithm? The greatest creators didn't worship effort. They cultivated direction. They weren't the loudest in the room. They were the ones who understood that power flows to those who refuse to play small, silently. Most men are not trapped by lack of talent, but by fear of rejection. They crave acceptance from the very tribe that keeps them small. They don't want greatness. They want permission. And that's why they stay in respectable poverty, emotionally, financially, spiritually. This isn't about laziness. It's about fear. The Pygmalion effect explains it well. Invisible expectations shape who we believe we can become. Alfred Adler called it the social inferiority complex. The hunger to belong outweighs the hunger to evolve. And so you hide your ambition. You shrink your power. You camouflage your brilliance, just to stay liked by people who fear your light. If you want to escape, start here. Practice voluntary exclusion. Choose greatness over approval. Choose to be misunderstood. Choose to be arrogant in the eyes of the average, because the price of acceptance is your sovereignty, and it's never worth it. That's how the system wins, not by oppression, but by elegance. It builds golden cages. It offers you stability, respectability, predictability. And in exchange, it takes your fire, your risk, your edge. The corporate world is the most seductive trap ever built, because it looks like success, but feels like slow death. Viktor Frankl warned us, many are not depressed, they're just existentially empty. Their careers are masks, their roles, rituals, their work, a performance for meaning that never arrives. Social psychology reveals the truth. Your brain prioritizes tribal safety over personal purpose. That's why so many brilliant people settle. They don't break because the system doesn't need them broken. It needs them distracted, comfortable, asleep. And here's the harsh truth. Money doesn't come to the most obedient. It comes to the most dangerous, the most strategic, the ones who can say no, who can walk away, who don't need to be liked because they've learned to be respected. Robert Greene made it clear, if you don't set boundaries, you become disposable in business, in love, in life. And neuroscience backs it up. Calculated risk triggers real dopamine. Submissiveness? It shuts it down. So train yourself in strategic aggression. Learn to speak softly, but carry sharp edges. Be someone others don't want to betray. Because power isn't about dominance. It's about being unignorable. But freedom, real freedom, it's terrifying. That's why most men reject it. They call it immaturity, recklessness, rebellion. Because if you truly had no one to blame, who would you become? Nietzsche said, the cost of freedom is to accept that you are both the source of your suffering and your salvation. Most prefer chains, because chains come with excuses. And so the mind builds prisons disguised as order. Confirmation bias makes it worse. When you believe freedom is dangerous, you attract people and systems that keep you safe and stagnant. Start with micro-freedoms. Design your day like you own it. Decide what's non-negotiable for your peace, your time, your truth. Because if you can't master your morning, you'll never master your mission. And finally, escape the identity of the useful man. You weren't born to serve systems. You were born to shape reality. Being useful is not the same as being necessary. And when you confuse the two, you kill your creativity. Nietzsche and Jung both warned us. The ideal worker is the one who never dares to author his own life, who trades his vision for validation, who seeks love through performance and disappears in the process. True creation begins when you stop begging to be needed and start building something only you could have imagined. This is economic individuation, aligning your talent, your vision, and your value with the real world. not with inherited scripts, because the world doesn't need more obedient workers. It needs dangerous creators, silent billionaires, men and women who rise in depth, not noise, in essence, not performance, in quiet power, not loud desperation. If this awakened something in you, you know what to do. Society loves what it can predict, what it can name, what it can place in a category, in a chart, in a salary bracket. And that's why it punishes self-authorship. Because if you are easy to understand, you are easy to control. Most people don't want you to think differently. They want you to act predictably, to be consistent, safe, manageable. But Jung warned us about the cost, the domesticated hero, the man who silences his own myth to play a role, who edits his truth for applause, who betrays his soul in exchange for belonging. It's the conformity bias. Your brain tells you, if I obey, I will not be exiled. If I blend in, I will be protected. But the cost? You stop evolving. You become another echo in a chorus of mediocrity. The antidote is not chaos, but calculated chaos. Learn to inject unpredictability into your habits. Shock your own system. Be a stranger to your patterns. Because comfort breeds control, and control breeds invisibility. And while we're here, let's talk about the illusion of virtue in overwork. You think you're being noble by pushing yourself to the brink. But what if your exhaustion isn't sacrifice? What if it's just a mask for avoidance? Nietzsche would call it the morality of resentment. When suffering becomes your redemption story. When you wear burnout like a badge because you're terrified of facing your real emptiness. Psychologically, this is ego addiction. You're not chasing outcomes, you're chasing attention, pity, status. You don't want to win, you want to be seen trying, because trying validates your narrative of struggle. So strip the mask, ask yourself the 3 raw truths. If no one could see my effort, would I still do it? If I didn't get credit, would I still grind this hard? If I stopped working, would I still respect myself? Sometimes the hustle isn't courage, it's fear in disguise. And nowhere is this more brutal than in the role of the good man. Society tells you, be good, be kind, be agreeable. But in reality, good often means harmless, contained, convenient, and slowly forgotten. Nietzsche deconstructed this myth. The good man is often a creation of collective resentment, a moral weapon to keep you obedient, useful, castrated of your fire. And what's the result? Silent violence, men full of repressed rage, and not explosive, but eroded, men who give everything and feel nothing, who never erupt, but slowly vanish. Behaviorally, this turns into passive aggression, sarcasm, numbness, dependency. The cost of being good in a world that uses you is becoming invisible even to yourself. But rage can be fuel if you redirect it. Don't explode, transmute. Turn the silent scream into structure. Build boundaries from the ashes of your people-pleasing. Let your anger become architecture. Because the rules you're playing by, they were never made for you. You think obedience leads to abundance, but in reality, the rules were designed to protect those who already have power and distract those trying to get it. Howard Zinn once said, "You can't be neutral on a moving train," and James Baldwin reminded us, "The game is rigged, but you still have to play." The illusion of guaranteed mobility is a sedative, a myth to keep you from questioning the architecture of the game. Authority bias makes it worse. You assume the rules must be good because they're enforced. But most rules weren't made to elevate you. They were made to contain you. So ask, which rules are you following without question? Which scripts did you inherit without consent? Which lines do you repeat that don't belong to your voice? It's time to rewrite, to become the architect, not just the actor. Because here's the brutal truth. You were trained to be useful, not powerful. From childhood, you were praised for how well you served, how quickly you responded, how much you gave. But no one taught you how to take up space, how to lead, how to own. Naval Ravikant said, "Play long-term games with long-term people." But first, you have to stop playing other people's games. Vertical conditioning is the root. You were taught that usefulness equals worth, that purpose comes from pleasing others. But usefulness is a trap. It gets you gratitude, but not power. Praise, but not equity. Real power begins when you stop asking, "How can I help?" and start asking, "What do I want to build?" So here's your weekly ritual: inversion. Every week, review your tasks and eliminate 3 that made you useful but not sovereign. Replace them with 1 that builds authority, ownership, or brand. Don't just do. Construct. Because the world doesn't need another helpful man. It needs a dangerous one. A man who can serve, but doesn't need to. A man who creates, not from obligation, but from vision. A man who can be soft, but chooses to be sharp. A man no longer living to be useful, but ready to be unforgettable. Erich Fromm once said, "Freedom is not something most people seek. It's something they secretly fear." In Escape from Freedom, he explains why. To be free is not just to choose. It is to carry the unbearable weight of being the author of your own life and your own failure. And that terrifies people. So instead, they cling to authority, to order, to certainty. They call it humility. They call it loyalty. But often it's just fear wearing a nicer suit. Men who worship structure often do so, not because they are strong, but because they are scared. Because thinking for yourself means making mistakes that are yours alone. Because having power means having no one left to blame. Psychodynamically, the mind that cannot tolerate ambiguity will always submit to someone else's plan. The unknown is too vast, the silence is too loud, so it finds refuge in systems, even if those systems slowly destroy it. So what's the practice? Build your capacity for uncertainty. Sit in the silence without rushing to fill it. Ask yourself, in moments of fear, am I about to obey out of conviction or out of cowardice? That question alone can break a lifetime of sleepwalking, and much of this obedience is tied to guilt, deep, inherited guilt. Max Weber called it the Protestant work ethic, a historical mutation that turned labor into salvation. In this framework, you don't work because it's productive. You work because if you stop, you feel unworthy. The capitalist machine absorbed this ethic. Now to rest is to sin. To pause is to regress. And the only way to prove you deserve life is to suffer visibly for it. Guilt became currency. Morality became measured by exhaustion. And ambition? Often nothing more than a desperate attempt to silence the voice that says, "You don't deserve to be here." So here's the provocation. Do you really want to evolve? Or are you just trying to earn the right to exist? Rewriting your productivity ethic begins by decoupling worth from output. Start with this. Your existence is not a debt. Your value is not measured in deliverables. Then ask, what would my ambition look like if it came from desire, not deficiency? Because obedience isn't always noble. Sometimes it's just laziness in disguise. Simone de Beauvoir, in The Ethics of Ambiguity, says that many obey not out of honor, but because they fear the weight of freedom, of choice, of being the one who can't blame the script. Obedience lets you avoid risk, avoid error, avoid authorship. And so, the obedient mind often rationalizes its stagnation as maturity, as consistency, as responsibility. But what if it's just fear of falling without a net? To take back your life, create an authorial decision system. 3 simple steps: awareness, ownership, action. Awareness. Is this decision coming from me or from expectation? Ownership. If this goes wrong, am I ready to own it fully? Action. Will this path grow my power or just preserve my comfort? That's how freedom begins. Not in rebellion, but in responsibility. Carl Jung would add another layer. He spoke of the shadow of the good worker, the archetype of the diligent, punctual, loyal man. Respected, reliable, silent, and deeply disconnected. Because when this archetype dominates, others die. The creator is silenced, the rebel is shamed, the sage is ignored, and what remains? A machine in human form, functional, empty, predictable. This idolatry of hard work isn't wisdom, it's trauma, passed down by ancestors who faced famine, war, collapse. They taught us that rest is danger, that softness is death. And so we built our identities not on presence, but on production. But now, we're overfed and underfelt, efficient but spiritually dead. The solution is integration. Don't destroy the worker, expand him. Invite the rebel. Let him question the system. Invite the creator. Let him imagine new ones. Invite the sage. Let him step back, breathe, and choose. Reclaim your rejected archetypes, and you reclaim your vitality. And perhaps the most chilling warning comes from Nietzsche in Thus Spoke Zarathustra. He describes the last man, the final product of civilization's decay, a being who no longer strives, who no longer dreams, who wants only comfort, safety, and predictability. The last man doesn't rebel. He doesn't believe. He doesn't suffer. He consumes, he survives, and he smiles, not out of joy but sedation. This is where obedience leads, to a life without grandeur, without pain, but also without meaning. The last man has no gods, no devils, no poetry, just convenience. Existentially, it's a trade. Give up the pain of becoming, and you give up the possibility of glory. The refusal to suffer becomes the refusal to transcend. So what do? Use pain as a compass. Don't worship it. Don't dramatize it. Just listen. Because beneath the ache is a map, a direction, a demand from your higher self. When it hurts, ask, what is this trying to birth in me? What illusion is dying here? What version of me is being demanded next? That's how you build a life that matters. Not one that looks good. Not one that pleases others. But one that remembers you, because it was authored by you. So ask yourself one last time, are you building a life or just surviving someone else's? Maybe you're still haunted by the idea that you're behind, that you missed some secret train, that everyone else received a map, except you. But what if the truth is darker and more liberating? What if there never was a map? Only illusions passed down by tired men to keep you in the same cycle. You were never supposed to fit in. You were supposed to awaken. That ache in your chest, it's not failure. It's your soul asking for authorship. It's your deeper self whispering that usefulness is not enough, that surviving is not living, that safety is not sovereignty. You were not born to be understood by the crowd. You were born to be remembered by the few who recognize silent greatness. And maybe right now, you don't need more motivation. You need solitude, precision, space to think, permission to want more, without apology. That's what this channel is for. Not to hype you up, but to sharpen your edge. Not to feed your ego, but to nourish your depth, not to give you answers, but to ask the questions no one else dares to. Because this isn't a channel for followers. It's for thinkers in hiding, warriors in disguise, philosophers with scars, creators in the making. So if something in this video didn't just inform you, but reminded you of who you really are, then stay. Not because I told you to, because you recognized something, a symbol, a code, a quiet fire. Subscribe if you're done playing small. Subscribe if you're ready to build in silence and rise in depth. Subscribe not out of habit, but out of alignment. This isn't just another channel, it's a signal, and if you felt it, then you're already one of us.